The Krathan Empire scanned Earth and found the perfect night to invade. Glowing skulls on fire, bodies hanging from trees, children walking alone through the dark while adults just watched. Their commander made one confident call. Humanity had already collapsed. He was wrong. Like, subscribe, and comment which decoration scares an alien most. Now let's step into the night Earth's worst invasion became its strangest victory. Commander Dale Ashford was 41 years old, a third-generation Air Force veteran turned small-town sheriff, and the only man in Maple Hollow who still believed something was wrong with the sky. For 3 weeks he had been logging strange lights over the cornfields east of town. Nobody believed him. His deputies laughed. His wife told him to get more sleep. The mayor told him to stop scaring tourists away before the town's biggest weekend of the year. Maple Hollow was famous, at least regionally, for going all out on Halloween. Every house competed. Every yard had a theme. The high school turned its football field into a haunted corn maze every single year, and people drove in from 3 counties just to walk through it. Dale didn't care about any of that. He cared about the lights. He cared about the way his radio had picked up a strange signal 2 nights ago. A signal that wasn't human, wasn't military, and definitely wasn't supposed to exist. He sat in his truck outside the diner, sipping coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring up at a sky that looked too quiet. 12,000 miles above him, the Krathan scout ship Vathorn hung motionless in low orbit, its sensors sweeping the entire continent for the optimal entry point. The ship's tactical officer, a tall, gray-skinned soldier named Brask, reviewed hundreds of potential landing zones across North America. Major cities had too much military presence. Coastal regions had naval patrols. Mountain regions had difficult terrain. But smaller towns, especially ones in the rural middle of the country, showed almost no organized defense at all. Brask narrowed the list down to a single location, a town called Maple Hollow. Population 8,400, no military base. No significant law enforcement presence beyond a small sheriff's department. And most importantly, according to the ship's surface scans, a town currently undergoing what their sensors interpreted as a mass societal breakdown. Skeletal remains displayed openly in yards. Fires burning unattended near homes. Fog rolling through streets with no clear environmental cause. Children moving in groups after dark with no adult supervision, going from house to house, and strangely, receiving items from strangers at every single door. To the Krathan War Council, this looked like a civilization on the edge of total collapse. No order, no structure, no fear, the perfect invasion target. The Krathan High Command authorized a small advance team, 6 soldiers led by Commander Roth Vayland. A battle-hardened officer who had overseen the conquest of 3 separate worlds and had never once encountered serious resistance from any species below Tier 4 military technology. Roth believed in precision. He believed in clean, tactical execution. He did not believe in random fire, random fog, or random screaming children carrying bags of candy through dark streets, because his scanners hadn't translated the word candy yet. And wouldn't for several more hours, which would end up being the least of his problems. Roth had spent the flight in briefing the same way he always did, reviewing terrain maps, population density charts, and projected resistance levels with the calm detachment of a man who had done this dozens of times before. He had walked his soldiers through every contingency. What to do if local military responded within 10 minutes? What to do if civilian crowds attempted to flee? What to do if law enforcement arrived with backup before the team could establish a secure perimeter? Every scenario had a clear answer, drilled into each soldier until it became reflex. Nothing in any briefing had prepared them for a scenario where the locals simply did not react the way frightened populations were supposed to react at all. The ship's intelligence officer, a quiet, methodical soldier named Pell, had flagged something strange in the final approach data, a detail Roth had dismissed as a sensor anomaly. The town's residents showed elevated heart rates, raised voices, and rapid movement patterns consistent with combat stress. Except none of it correlated with fear responses in any database the Krathan military had ever recorded from 100 other worlds. Pell had simply written it off as an unusual local custom and moved on, because nobody on that ship, not even their most experienced analyst, could have guessed the truth. The elevated heart rates weren't fear, they were excitement. The raised voices weren't warnings, they were laughter. The Vathorn descended just after sunset, cloaked in a holographic shell designed to look like nothing more than drifting cloud cover. It landed in a wooded area just outside Maple Hollow, far enough from town to avoid detection, close enough to walk in within 20 minutes. Roth stepped out first, his armor humming quietly, his targeting display already mapping the nearest structures. Behind him came 5 soldiers, each one outfitted with human disguise technology capable of generating convincing biological mimicry, skin, hair, clothing. Even small mannerisms pulled from intercepted local broadcasts. The disguises activated one by one, and almost immediately something went wrong. The technology, designed to scan nearby humans and generate a convincing local appearance, picked up the only humans within scanning range at that exact moment. Children, in costumes. The first soldier's disguise locked onto a passing trick or treater dressed as a vampire, and rendered him in full vampire aesthetic, pale skin, fake fangs, dramatic cape included. The second locked onto a werewolf costume 2 streets over. The third became, for reasons the ship's engineers would spend weeks trying to explain, a 6-foot-tall pumpkin with a glowing face. Roth turned to look at his team and felt something he had never felt in 11 years of military service. Confusion bordering on horror. "Explain this," he said. None of them could. The scanners insisted this was an accurate representation of standard local civilian appearance. Roth looked toward the glow of the town ahead, the flickering orange lights, the fog drifting between houses. The distant sound of laughter and screaming mixed together in a way his translator couldn't categorize as either celebration or warfare. He ran a quick diagnostic on his own disguise unit, half expecting it to malfunction the same way the others had. The system reported full functionality, rendering him in the appearance of an average adult male, dark jacket, plain boots, a face built from a composite of a dozen intercepted broadcast images. At least one of them had escaped the disguise system's strange new sense of humor. He looked down the line at his team. Velk had become some kind of bandaged figure his translator labeled, with no further explanation, as Mummy. Another soldier, designated Karth, had been rendered as a skeleton with painted bone patterns across exposed skin, an image the scanner flagged as anatomically inaccurate by a significant margin. A third soldier had somehow become an exact replica of what the system called a ghost, a flowing white shape with no visible legs at all, which made walking considerably more difficult than it should have been. Roth considered briefly requesting an emergency abort. He dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arrived. Aborting a mission over a malfunctioning disguise system would end his career, possibly his life, depending on how High Command interpreted the failure. Better to push forward, complete the assessment, and let the engineers sort out the disguise malfunction once they were back in orbit. He took a breath, straightened his now pumpkin-faced soldier's collar, and gave the order to advance. It was, without question, the worst decision he had made in his entire career. And he wouldn't fully understand why, until it was far too late to turn back. The team moved through the tree line in tight formation, the way Roth had trained 100 times before on 100 different worlds. Stay low, stay quiet, avoid open ground. Identify hostiles before they identify you. None of that training prepared him for what stepped out from behind a mailbox the moment they reached the edge of a residential street. A boy no older than 10, dressed as a zombie with fake blood smeared across his face, pointed directly at the soldier wearing the pumpkin disguise and screamed with what Roth's translator labeled as either extreme distress or extreme excitement. The system couldn't decide which. "Dude, your costume is sick." The pumpkin-faced soldier, designated Unit Thurn, froze completely. His targeting reticle hovered over the child for nearly 4 full seconds, while his combat AI tried to process whether this constituted a threat. Roth's voice cut through the comm link immediately. "Hold position. Do not engage." Thurn lowered his weapon arm, which had been halfway raised on reflex, and the boy ran off laughing toward a group of friends. Completely unaware, he had just stood within striking distance of a soldier capable of leveling a city block. Roth exhaled slowly. "Tactical assessment," he said quietly to his second in command, a soldier named Velk who had taken on the appearance of a fairly convincing mummy. "The local population does not register us as a threat." Velk scanned the street ahead. Dozens of children moved between houses in small groups, climbing porch steps, knocking on doors, holding bags open while adults dropped items inside. None of them ran. None of them screamed in fear. If anything, the screaming Roth kept hearing was something closer to joy. "Sir," Velk said carefully, "I believe this activity is voluntary." Roth didn't respond right away. He was watching a grown man standing on his porch wearing a full werewolf mask, handing out small wrapped items to every child who approached, while a fog machine beside him pumped a steady stream of white mist across the yard. This was either the most elaborate camouflage operation Roth had ever witnessed, designed to lure invaders into a false sense of security before a coordinated counter-strike, or something his translator still refused to properly define. He decided to test his theory. He approached the porch directly, doing his best to mimic the relaxed posture of the humans around him. The man in the werewolf mask turned toward him immediately. "Whoa, that's a great costume, man. Very detailed. What is that, some kind of demon thing?" Roth's translator stalled for nearly 2 full seconds trying to process the question. "I am Commander Roth Valand of the Krathan Empire," he said, his voice modulator doing its best to sound human and failing in a way that came across as slightly robotic and deeply unsettling. The man in the werewolf mask grinned wider. "Dude, the voice effect is incredible. Did you build that into the mask yourself?" Roth stared at him. Somewhere behind him, Velk whispered through the comm, "Sir, I do not believe he understands the threat we represent." Roth was beginning to suspect the same thing, and it terrified him far more than any army ever had. The man held out a bowl. "You want some candy? Little old for trick or treating, but hey, Halloween's for everybody." Roth looked down at the bowl. Small, brightly wrapped objects sat inside it, each one giving off a faint chemical signature his scanners flagged as sugar-based and completely non-lethal. He had no protocol for this. 11 years of military service, 3 planetary conquests, and not a single simulation had prepared him for a civilian, voluntarily offering him food during what should have been the opening minutes of a planetary invasion. Behind him, Unit Thurn, still wearing his glowing pumpkin face, reached forward without authorization and took a piece. Roth turned sharply. "Soldier, explain your actions." Thurn looked at the wrapped object in his hand, then at Roth, then unwrapped it slowly and placed it in his mouth before anyone could stop him. His eyes widened behind the pumpkin mask. "Commander," he said quietly over the comm, "I do not believe this planet should be conquered. I believe it should be studied, extensively. Possibly forever." Roth opened his mouth to issue a disciplinary warning. He never got the chance, because at that exact moment, a second child, this one dressed as a generic superhero with a cape clearly too long for his body, tripped directly into Velk's mummy-wrapped legs and grabbed onto him to keep from falling. Velk stiffened completely, every combat instinct in his body screaming to react, while his programming simultaneously insisted that striking a child during what appeared to be a non-hostile civilian encounter would violate at least 6 separate articles of Krathan engagement. "Protocol." He settled for standing perfectly still, arms slightly raised, looking like a man trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. The boy looked up at him, grinned, said "sick rap job," and ran off without a second thought. Velk exhaled slowly through his translator. "Commander," he said quietly, "I do not believe these civilians possess any concept of personal danger." Roth was beginning to agree, and the realization unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. Across the street, a group of teenagers walked past carrying plastic weapons, fake swords, foam axes, one of them even holding something that resembled with disturbing accuracy a Krathan pulse rifle, except clearly made of painted cardboard. Roth's targeting system flagged it automatically as a possible armed combatant before correcting itself half a second later. Embarrassed by its own mistake in a way Roth didn't know military hardware was capable of being. He watched the teenagers walk past without a glance in his direction, laughing about something unrelated entirely, completely unaware that 6 armed invaders stood less than 20 feet away. Deciding in real time whether tonight was the night Earth's defense began or ended. Roth checked his chronometer. 11 minutes had passed since landing, and not a single tactical objective had been completed. No structures secured, no civilians detained. No command infrastructure identified. By any normal invasion standard, this represented a catastrophic operational failure. And yet, watching his own soldiers stand frozen amid a street full of laughing children and glowing decorations, he found himself struggling to define exactly what kind of failure this actually was. He keyed his comm again. "Velk, status of the structure ahead." Velk's voice came back hesitant. "Commander, the structure appears to be a private residence. The occupant continues to offer wrapped food items to passing children at regular intervals. I do not yet understand the strategic purpose." Roth stared at the porch light glowing warm against the dark street, at the fog curling low across the lawn, at dozens of small figures moving from house to house in an endless, orderly, voluntary procession that looked less like chaos and more like some kind of ritual his species had simply never encountered before. Whatever this was, it wasn't collapse, and that thought, more than anything else that night, was the one that finally made Commander Roth Valand genuinely afraid. He had no way of knowing that 3 streets away, Sheriff Dale Ashford had just spotted something on his truck's dashboard radar that made his cold coffee suddenly feel very, very irrelevant. Dale had been parked outside the diner for almost 20 minutes when the signal hit again, the same strange frequency he had picked up 2 nights earlier. Except this time it wasn't faint and distant. It was close, less than a mile away, moving slowly through the residential streets near Birchwood Avenue, exactly where half the town's trick-or-treaters were currently walking door to door in the dark. His stomach dropped. He grabbed his radio and called it into dispatch, his voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to creep up his spine. "This is Ashford. I need eyes on Birchwood, possible unidentified persons in the area. Proceed with caution. Do not approach alone." Dispatch responded with confusion, since nothing on their end showed anything unusual, just the normal chaos of Halloween night, kids running between yards, parents trailing behind with flashlights, teenagers setting off firecrackers 2 blocks over like they did every single year. But Dale trusted his gut more than he trusted dispatch's reports, and his gut was screaming at him. He started his truck and pulled out onto Main Street, weaving carefully around groups of costumed kids crossing the road, his headlights sweeping across inflatable ghosts and plastic gravestones stuck into front lawns. As he drove, his mind ran back through the last 3 weeks. The first night he'd seen the lights, he had been parked on the same back road he always patrolled, half asleep, when a streak of pale green light crossed the sky too slow to be a shooting star and too fast to be a plane. He had written it off as a weather balloon until it happened again 2 nights later, this time accompanied by a burst of static across every radio frequency in his truck simultaneously, including the ones that weren't supposed to pick up anything at all. He had reported it to the county, who suggested he get his equipment checked. He had reported it to the Air Force liaison 2 hours away, who suggested, politely, that he was probably picking up interference from a new cell tower. Nobody took him seriously, and after 15 years of being the guy everyone trusted to keep this town safe, Dale had started to wonder if he was finally losing the thread, the way his own father had near the end of his career. Then the signal came back tonight, stronger than ever, and every instinct he had told him this wasn't static, and it definitely wasn't a cell tower. As he turned onto Birchwood, he saw them. 6 figures standing near the Hendrickson house, oddly tall, oddly stiff in their movements, gathered around a porch like they were inspecting it rather than simply walking past. One of them had a face that glowed faintly orange in the dark, which under normal circumstances might have just looked like an elaborate costume, except Dale noticed the way the light pulsed slightly. Almost like a heartbeat, almost like something biological rather than battery-powered. He parked half a block away and stepped out slowly, hand resting near his hip out of pure habit. Even though regulation said he wasn't supposed to draw on unconfirmed threats during a town event with this many civilians around. He walked closer, doing his best to look casual, blending into the general flow of adults supervising their kids from a distance. Up close, the 6 figures were even stranger. Their proportions were slightly wrong, limbs a fraction too long, movements just a bit too smooth, like watching someone walk who had only recently learned how human joints were supposed to bend. One of them, the tallest, the one who seemed to be giving quiet instructions to the others, turned his head toward Dale with unnatural precision, scanning him head to toe in under a second. "Evening," Dale said, keeping his voice relaxed. "Y'all enjoying the decorations?" The tall one tilted his head slightly, a gesture that looked almost correct but not quite, like a puppet operated by someone still learning the strings. "We are conducting an assessment," the figure said, his voice carrying a strange electronic undertone beneath the words. Dale raised an eyebrow. "An assessment of what exactly?" "Local defensive capability," the figure replied flatly, with the kind of blunt honesty that almost sounded like a joke. Except nothing about his tone suggested humor. Dale almost laughed anyway, mostly out of nerves. "Buddy, the only defensive capability on this street is Mrs. Hendrickson's dog, and he's scared of his own shadow." One of the smaller figures, the one with the strange, glowing pumpkin-like face, turned toward Dale with sudden interest. "Sir, is the canine a tactical asset?" Dale blinked. "It's a chihuahua." The glowing-faced one turned back to the tall leader. "Commander, I do not believe the chihuahua poses a credible threat." Dale's instincts. The same ones honed over 15 years of police work, and a lifetime of growing up around military stories from his father. Told him with absolute certainty that something about this conversation was deeply, fundamentally wrong, even if he couldn't yet say exactly what. He decided to test it. "You boys aren't from around here, are you?" The tall one straightened, his posture shifting into something almost formal. "We are not." Dale's hand moved slightly closer to his radio. "Mind telling me where you're from then?" There was a pause, just half a second too long to be natural, before the tall one answered. "Beyond your current understanding of the universe." Dale stared at him. Somewhere behind him, a group of trick-or-treaters ran past laughing, one of them dressed as an astronaut. Completely unaware, they had just sprinted directly past an actual alien commander mid-conversation with the town sheriff. Dale slowly reached for his radio, thumb hovering over the call button, his mind racing through every possible explanation that didn't involve the words first contact. He found none. And as he opened his mouth to call for backup, the tall figure's eyes shifted color, just slightly, just enough for Dale to notice, right before 12,000 miles above them. The Krathan War Council sent down an emergency transmission that would change everything happening on that quiet street in the next 60 seconds. The transmission hit Roth's earpiece with the kind of urgency reserved for catastrophic battlefield failures. "Commander Valand, report immediately. Orbital sensors have detected a localized communication attempt from a ground unit near your position. Confirm status." Roth kept his eyes locked on the human standing in front of him, the one who called himself a sheriff, the one whose hand kept drifting toward some kind of device on his belt. "Status is stable," Roth said quietly into his comm, while keeping his expression as neutral as his disguise technology allowed. "Local authority figure has made contact." Assessing threat level, the voice on the other end, Krathan High Command itself, sharpened immediately. "Authority figure. Explain his capabilities." Roth glanced at Dale, who was still simply standing there, hand near his hip, looking more confused than afraid. Surrounded by laughing children in costumes, who had no idea how close they were standing to a fully armed invasion team. "Minimal," Roth admitted. "He appears to be some form of regional law enforcement, lightly armed. No backup support visible." There was a pause on the other end, then a new voice entered the channel, sharper, colder, the unmistakable tone of someone several ranks above Roth. "This is High Marshal Varek. If local authority has made contact, you are to neutralize and proceed with the original objective. We cannot risk early exposure." Roth's hand drifted slightly toward his weapon, the one disguised as nothing more than a metal flashlight clipped to his belt, indistinguishable to human eyes. He had neutralized targets before, dozens of times, on dozens of worlds, always with the same clean efficiency that had earned him his rank. But something about this moment, standing on a quiet residential street surrounded by glowing plastic pumpkins and children in superhero costumes, made his hand hesitate in a way it never had before. Dale noticed the hesitation immediately, the slight shift in posture, the way the tall stranger's hand moved toward his hip the same way Dale's had. 15 years of police instinct kicked in at once. "Hands where I can see them," Dale said, his voice dropping into the flat, controlled tone he used during actual emergencies. The tone that had talked down 3 armed suspects, without a single shot fired in his entire career. Roth froze. His translator processed the command instantly, recognizing the universal posture of someone preparing to escalate a confrontation. Behind him, his 5 soldiers shifted slightly, sensing the tension, their disguised forms tensing in ways that looked deeply unnatural to anyone paying close attention, which, fortunately for them, in that specific moment, nobody except Dale actually was. "Sir," Roth said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a man who had spent the last several minutes slowly realizing his translator's understanding of human social customs was dangerously incomplete. "We mean no harm to you or this community." Dale didn't lower his hand. "Then you mind telling me what you're really doing standing outside the Hendrickson place at 8:30 at night, dressed like that, talking like that, with a voice that sounds like it's coming out of a busted speaker?" For the first time in 11 years of military service, Commander Roth Valand genuinely did not know what to say. He thought about the briefing room 12,000 miles above him, the clean tactical maps, the casualty projections, the simple, confident plan that had made this assignment look like the easiest deployment of his entire career. None of it had accounted for a single unarmed man asking direct, simple questions with the kind of calm authority that no amount of tactical training had prepared Roth to answer. He thought about Thurn, standing just behind him, candy wrapper still crumpled in one hand, looking less like a soldier and more like a child who had wandered away from a parade. He thought about the porch light behind Dale, warm and steady, completely unconcerned with the fact that an actual invasion force stood 20 feet away deciding the fate of the operation. None of it made sense by any military framework Roth had ever studied, and that uncertainty, more than any weapon pointed at him, was what finally made his hand hesitate over his hip. High Command's voice cut back into his earpiece, sharp and impatient. "Status report, Commander. Has the threat been neutralized?" Roth opened his mouth to respond. And that was the exact moment Unit Thurn, the soldier still wearing the glowing pumpkin disguise, who had spent the last several minutes quietly eating his second piece of candy in complete violation of at least 4 separate protocols, stepped forward and said the single sentence that would derail the entire invasion before it had even truly begun. "Commander, I do not think we should hurt this man. I think we should ask him where he got that little dog." The street went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Dale stared at the glowing-faced figure who had just expressed concern for Mrs. Hendrickson's chihuahua in the middle of what was rapidly becoming the strangest standoff of his entire career. Roth turned sharply toward Thurn, his composure cracking for the first time since landing. "Soldier, stand down and return to formation immediately." Thurn didn't move. "Commander, with respect, I have eaten local food, observed local customs, and I am beginning to question the entire premise of our mission." High Command's voice exploded through every soldier's earpiece simultaneously, loud enough that even Dale could faintly hear the tinny edge of shouting coming from somewhere near the strangers' heads. "This is High Marshal Varric. Unit Thurn, you are in violation of direct combat protocol. Stand down or face immediate disciplinary action." Thurn looked at the wrapper still crumpled in his hand, then at the porch light glowing warm and orange behind him, then at the dozens of children still laughing and running between yards, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding feet away from them. "Sir," he said quietly, "I do not believe this planet wants war. I believe this planet wants to know if you'd like some candy first." Dale, despite every ounce of professional training telling him to stay focused, felt his jaw drop slightly. Roth's hand finally closed around the disguised weapon at his hip, his mind racing through every possible outcome, every variable his training had ever covered, and finding none of them adequate for the situation currently unfolding. High Command's voice sharpened into something close to fury. Commander Valand, if your unit will not comply, you are authorized to use lethal force to maintain operational secrecy. Roth's grip tightened around the disguised weapon at his hip. He looked at Dale, then at the dark windows of the houses behind him, then at the small shapes still moving between yards in the distance, laughing, completely unaware. He had followed orders like this before on other worlds, against other species, and never once hesitated. This time his finger wouldn't move. Somewhere deep in his combat programming, a single contradictory data point kept resurfacing, the memory of Thurn's voice insisting this planet wanted candy, not war. And the deeply unfamiliar sensation of suspecting, for the first time in his career, that his soldier might actually be right. Dale's hand finally closed around his radio, thumb pressing the emergency call button just as the tall stranger in front of him raised his arm with sudden, terrifying speed. For one full second, time seemed to slow down on that quiet street, fog drifting between jack-o'-lanterns, distant laughter echoing from porches further down the block. Completely unaware that an actual armed confrontation between two species was about to erupt in the middle of their neighborhood. And then from somewhere behind Dale, a deep booming voice broke the silence entirely. "Hey, is that a 6-foot inflatable skeleton or do you just have really tall friends?" Every head turned. Standing on his porch, holding a beer in one hand and a bowl of candy in the other, was Russell Prout, Maple Hollow's loudest and most enthusiastic Halloween decorator. A man who had once spent $4,000 turning his front yard into a full-sized haunted graveyard. He squinted at the group, standing near the Hendricksons' yard. Taking in their unnaturally tall frames and stiff posture with the unfiltered confidence of a man 2 beers deep into a holiday, he took far too seriously. "Man, that costume detail is unreal," Russell said, stepping off his porch and walking straight toward them without a hint of fear. "Where'd you get that voice modulator?" "I gotta get one of those for next year." Roth's raised arm froze mid-motion. High Command's voice screamed through his earpiece, demanding an explanation for the sudden delay. But for the first time since the mission began, Roth genuinely had no idea how to answer. Because the most heavily armed soldier in his unit was currently being approached by an unarmed, slightly drunk human holding nothing more dangerous than a beer and a bowl of fun-sized chocolate bars. And somehow, against every tactical principle Roth had ever learned, that man looked completely unafraid. Russell Prout walked right up to Commander Roth Valand, completely unaware that he was standing within arm's reach of a weapon capable of leveling his entire street, and reached out to touch the fabric of Roth's disguised armor with the casual curiosity of a man inspecting a neighbor's new grill. "This is some next-level stuff," Russell said, grinning. "You build this yourself or order it online?" Roth's arm, still raised from moments earlier, slowly lowered on its own. His combat instincts completely overridden by a situation his training had never once prepared him for. Dale used the distraction to step closer, positioning himself between Russell and the strangers, his hand still resting on his radio, his eyes never leaving Roth's face. "Russell, get back to your house," Dale said firmly. Russell waved him off without even looking back. "Relax, Dale. It's Halloween. Everybody's in costume. You're being paranoid." High Command's voice exploded through the comm one final time, demanding immediate status. Threatening disciplinary action, screaming protocol violations that none of the soldiers standing on that street were currently capable of following, because every single one of them had quietly, slowly, without ever truly deciding to, stopped thinking of this mission as an invasion several minutes ago. Roth looked down at Russell, then at Dale, then at his own soldier still holding a half-eaten piece of candy with what could only be described as genuine contentment. He made a decision that would later be classified, debated, and eventually buried deep within Krathan military archives as the single strangest tactical call in the Empire's recorded history. He lowered his weapon completely. "Stand down," he said quietly into his comm, loud enough for only his team to hear. "All units stand down." High Command's voice came back instantly, sharp with disbelief. "Commander, repeat your last transmission." Roth looked around at the street one final time, at the fog drifting past glowing pumpkins, at children running freely through the dark without fear, at a heavily armed alien soldier eating chocolate beside a man wearing a 6-foot-tall illuminated gourd costume that wasn't actually a costume at all. "Mission assessment complete," Roth said, his voice steady despite everything happening around him. "This planet is not vulnerable, it is simply unconcerned. There is a difference, and we did not understand it until tonight." Dale lowered his hand from the radio slowly. Watching as the 6 strangers retreated step by step back toward the tree line at the edge of the neighborhood, their stiff, unnatural movements blending back into shadow until they disappeared completely. He never saw them again. He filed a report that night that nobody believed, the same way nobody had believed him about the lights 3 weeks earlier. The official record listed it as an unconfirmed disturbance, possibly related to Halloween pranksters in elaborate costumes. 12,000 miles above Maple Hollow, the Krathen War Council reviewed Roth's full report in stunned silence, watching footage of children laughing in the dark, of adults handing out food to strangers without fear, of an entire town celebrating something that should have terrified them, and finding nothing there but warmth instead of weakness. The High Marshal issued a final classification that night, one that would quietly circulate through Krathen Command for years afterward. Planetary target, Earth. Regional anomaly, Maple Hollow. Threat assessment, miscalculated. Population displays no exploitable weakness during this seasonal event. Recommendation, avoid contact during the final week of October indefinitely. Back on Earth, Dale Ashford still parks outside that same diner every October, watching the sky a little more carefully than he used to, sipping coffee that always seems to go cold a little too fast. Russell Prout still tells the story of the night he gave Halloween candy to what he insists, even now, was the best costume he's ever seen. Completely unaware of how right and how wrong he actually was. And somewhere far beyond the edge of the solar system, Commander Roth Valand still keeps a single piece of crumpled candy wrapper in a drawer aboard his ship. A quiet souvenir from the one night his entire mission fell apart, and the one night he learned that some planets aren't worth conquering, because they've already found something better to do with their time. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me what you'd do if an alien showed up at your door on Halloween night. Share this with someone who loves a good sci-fi twist. And subscribe for the next story, because trust me, this isn't the only town the Krathen Empire underestimated.